Hey guys, so today I want to talk a bit about mental models. Last week I talked about morning routines and how to read books, and one thing that helped me to guide any decision in my life has actually been mental models. And mental models, you already saw on the thumbnail, regression to the mean, comparative advantage. There are a lot of them, and they're quite intangible, I think, for people who never work with them. So I will take my time to describe 10 of them which helped me in my private life, in hobbies, and especially obviously in a business context. So let's dive right in. Okay, guys, as said, let's dive right in. As I previously said, today I want to talk a bit about mental models. I think that mental models itself is a topic that is quite neglected for decision making. I think decision making itself is quite complex and it's not really a tractable or quantifiable process. But mental models help me personally to frame things a lot. And today I want to talk about the 10 most useful ones, which help me in private life, in business, building startups, and so on. There will be some which I think some of you might know, but there will definitely be some more uncommon ones which are kind of counterintuitive. But yeah, I hope it's helpful for you guys. So I dive in by firstly explaining what is a mental model actually. So if you're not aware what a mental model is or the term means, a mental model is basically an internal representation of reality, right? So we all have our perspective, our heuristics of how the world works and how we can shape this world. And it's obviously a subjective truth, right? It's shaped by personal experiences, knowledge, beliefs, and so on. And from my point of view, it's one of the main points that can give you a competitive advantage in any field, because it's basically kind of a mindset that you're having and a stance that you take on the world. In terms of problem solving, it's super relevant because it's a cognitive tool, right? Like it helps you to quickly assess situations, identify patterns, and choose the appropriate action according to your heuristic you choose. And furthermore, they're not static, right? Which is why I think it's extremely useful to talk about mental models and biases and so on, because they evolve as people gain new information and experiences. And by you watching this video, you can obviously improve your understanding of mental models and identify mental models you can improve or, you know, pick up new ones. So I would just like to do a quick history lesson on this because it's quite interesting. So this term was originally coined by the Scottish philosopher and psychologist Kenneth Craig. He introduced this model and kind of proposed that the mind constructed a world around it, which was the first time in 1943. Um, there was another mention of a similar concept already quite early in 1927, actually, which was based on children's drawings. So Luquet, Jean-Chéri Luquet, argued that children create internal models of the world through painting, which was actually quite, it was limited to painting in this interpretation, but it's actually quite close to how a lot of psychologists and developmental psychologists view cognitive development today. This influenced Piaget a lot and got integrated into his ideas of cognitive development. And lastly, one of the most interesting psychological researchers that worked on this are Forrester and Johnson Ladd, who did this in the 70s and 80s, and they have been kind of they set the whole ground and the whole scientific basis for this concept of mental model. And lastly, I think one of the most interesting proponents of mental models has been Charlie Munger, who always advocated, who is, I think, most of you will know who Charlie Munger is, but it's basically the second or the right hand man of Berkshire Hathaway, so to say, so of Warren Buffett, and was is basically a legend in the investment space. And he advocated to use a multidisciplinary approach to mental models, meaning that you blend together mental models for investments, and later there will actually be a mental model that Charlie Munger also used. So kind of the TLDR for you guys. It's an internal representational framework that people use or create to understand, interpret, and predict how the world works in their mind, which helps them to make informed decisions and be better in problem solving. Okay, so let's dive into the 10 different heuristics that I find particularly useful. Firstly, as you can see, obviously all images are created by GPT. It's much easier, I think, but I think this image is actually not that bad. I could do some prompt engineering, but either way, in this case, it's mutually assured destruction. So what this means, I think from the picture you can already understand. It has the US flags, capitalism, it has some Cold War metaphors ingrained in it, obviously. What the basic idea is that with higher scale, destruction seems less likely, right? As with different nations, the more trade there is, the more both parties will get hurt, the more damage can be caused to both parties before actually someone stops or someone needs to stop, right? But what's a good framework is the higher impact. If it happens, there's actually a higher impact, right? So this mutually assured destruction, it is true that especially, for example, in competitive markets, that they are rarely destruction events, but if they are, they're much more severe in the event of a mistake than in any other world, right? So I think that's quite interesting to look into partnership zero-sum games and competition. So if you're considering to do a partnership with another market lead, it can be a strong move. It can also be quite detrimental in case there's some kind of critical error in the system. So I think this framework is quite interesting in terms of how to think about collaborations in zero-sum games, and I think this is something that I never applied to my private life. If you have some idea how to do it, it's quite interesting. But we can dive to the second one because that's actually a super interesting framework for private life as well. It's called Mr. Market. I really like the AI generated picture here, and it's a concept by the investment legends Benjamin Graham, if you know them, and it's introduced in his book The Intelligent Investor, which was actually in 1949, which is, to me, it's still crazy that is that long ago. And Mr. Markets basically is a metaphor, an allegory, which represents the stock market as an emotional, unpredictable individual with mood swings, which drive irrational price movements, right? So in this metaphor, on a daily basis, Mr. Market wants to buy or sell stocks at different time prices each day based on his mood swings, right? And the investors, according to this investor philosophy, basically, have the can choose to ignore the irrational behavior and make decisions based on intrinsic value, or follow the short-term behavior. And I think this is a very interesting framework to for your whole life, basically. So I have this in a lot of situations that there are uncontrollable things in my life and variables, and I think that if you build a conviction which is supported by data, it is very important to keep this in mind, this Mr. Market framework. In terms of ignoring the market or ignoring also feedback from people sometimes, if you have enough data to support a conviction that you did, it's definitely worth it to make decisions based on that. And lastly, it's I think this concept teaches the importance of staying disciplined and not being swayed by external behavior. And also, for me, what's interesting, we can kind of only control ourselves, right? So since we can only control ourselves, it's fine, and we can build our own convictions and not get influenced by others. Okay, let's jump to utility. I think now is going to be a bit of the economic basic theory, but utility is very interesting because I think the concept of utility itself is just the value of a good or service that you experience. It's highly individual, obviously, and the value of satisfaction that you gain from an additional unit or good of a service is the marginal utility. And this marginal utility is very interesting because it can be diminishing and decreasing. And just for a simple increasing example, for example, if you collect trading cards, with every trading card that you get closer to finalizing your collection, the intrinsic value of this card will improve, right? Or increase rather. While with clothes, for example, I think the first set of clothes you have a higher value than the second. Frankly, maybe there's also some kind of trading or brand game that you can play there, but in general, I think this is a very interesting framework just in terms of understanding how you consume, when are you satisfied, and it's pretty good to keep in mind with consumption. And it's not about consumption in the traditional sense. It can be media, for example. I realized that if I limit my time that I spend on certain medias or social medias, I derive the same satisfaction without suffering as much time. So I think that can be very interesting when maneuvering these decisions. Lastly, actually not lastly, let's go, there are a few more, but let's jump to comparative advantage. Again, economics time. What a comparative advantage is basically a concept by the economist David Ricardo, and what the idea behind this is that you can have basically a normal advantage, a competitive advantage, meaning that you are better at doing something, at producing something than other people, right? This can happen even in a company context, right, or in private life, whatever. But if you are better than another person in everything, but the other person is extremely good at one thing, even if they're worse than you, it can be worth it to delegate. That's basically what this framework suggests. So overall advantage, it's still favorable to trade, because you have opportunity costs. If you do something where you're the best, but where you're better than others, but not the best yourself, you have opportunity costs. And this is a quite interesting concept in terms of the mutual gains of delegation. So I think as a leader in a company, or even as anyone in a company, frankly, it's quite interesting to think where can I bring the most value, and where am I quote unquote wasting time, or where am I not the best person, or where can somebody else get close to my performance, and basically fire yourself continuously, right? It's a very common framework, which is quite interesting. Next up is surface area. I think this has become more popular, but in general, surface area is obviously the amount of space in this framework that touches the outside world, so to say. Um, and in this case, what is quite interesting is I think that you can increase and decrease the surface area that you expose yourself to in certain topics. For example, internet exposure versus networking. So networking not in the internet sense, but obviously in the career sense, or getting to know people, whatever. You can increase the touch points that you can have with people, or even the ways that they can contact you, right? These kind of things. It's very interesting to think about the surface area. If you, for example, want to build a company, do a YC co-founder matching profile, visit your local calls in the city, and obviously some of them will not be worth it, but in the end, luck is just if you put yourself out there, you will be lucky, right? So this is what the surface area means. And on the other side, very simply said, for example, if you're trying to lose weight, you should not be disciplined in a way, but rather just try to prevent even getting to these getting into these craving state in the first place. So, for example, keep the things that you snack on out of the house altogether, right? Which would kind of be the similar thing of the surface area, or improve the friction, or whatever, right? Another thing is the concept of multiplying by zero. I think all of you understand what multiplying by zero means in itself. So any number that is multiplied by zero equals zero. And this is just a very interesting idea of saying that no matter the system, there can be critical system failures and kind of non-negotiables. So if you run a company, or if you're even in any job, even YouTube, whatever you're doing, there might be things which are non-negotiables. You can do everything perfectly. If that is not good, you will fuck up. Like you will be screwed. And this is a very interesting framework to analyze a system, just to you know take an outside perspective and think about. Wait a second, what can actually go wrong, and what happens if this goes wrong? Is actually everything screwed, or can we find a way to work around it? So the seventh framework I want to talk about is regression to mean. And this is very interesting because this is again like a statistics idea, or like a statistics framework. In a normal distribution or normally distributed system, there can obviously be like very long deviations from the average. The thing is, with an increasing number of observations, you will automatically tend to return to an average, right? So, for example, if you measure measure a group of kids, for example, measure the IQ of a group of kids spontaneously, and they have a very low IQ, and then you do a test and you measure, and you do another group and you measure them with a different test, they have a higher IQ. The thing is, with this example specifically, you do an intervention, for example, changing the test, or maybe even doing some exercises in between or something, right? Um, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have any causal relationship, because you can just have a deviation, and with higher number of observations, you will automatically get closer to the mean, which doesn't mean that it's a causal relationship in terms of increasing or decreasing, right? This is very interesting to distinguish the baselines from the outliers, and it shows you the danger of extrapolating from these small sample sizes. This is something which is you can use this obviously for understanding any things, but I think for data analysis specifically, this idea of building a conviction based on a small amount of or small sample is very interesting to keep in mind always. All right, so one of my favorite ones is the map doesn't equal territory framework, which is it's very straightforward, but I love this idea because I think a lot of us stop at something when we see that the quote unquote map doesn't work out. But any map, any framework, any dashboards are always a simplification of reality. As written here, they would otherwise have no value. They will always be reductionist by nature, and in that the value lies for dashboards and for frameworks and for maps. But in reality, if you have reason to believe that you can do something which the data doesn't suggest, mostly the data, you can always dive one level deeper and confirm, or um, improve your conviction or like strengthen your conviction based on what you find. It's very interesting to not get, scared, quote unquote, by the authority map or authority dashboard. This is, I think, a very common one, first principles thinking. If you think about any problem, or if you want to even be creative and build a conviction on something, it's very interesting with this framework to take the smallest denominator that is given, that everybody accepts. So, for example, with first principles, if you want to, for example, build a rocket, talking about rockets, right, at reusability. If you talk about the beginning, like, okay, why don't we just build ourselves? It will be cheaper, right? Like, what do we need? And so on. Start from the bottom up. And I think with these, you can really, really develop contrarian convictions and also reverse engineer complicated situations and understand what was the decision process like, where did they do the decisions, or like what were the specific changes in the system they made. And I think, as said, for for creativity, I think it's one of the most interesting things. So, for example, if you have a market that you want to disrupt or where you want to build a product, a new product, just think about what are the basic assumptions of this market. What is like a truth that everybody accepts? Go one level deeper. What is the truth to that? Is there something that you can challenge, or is this actually a first principle, or is this already like an interpretation? And aligned with that, I think this is one of the most important strategic assets that you can have and that you can develop in your career and even in your private life, which is it's called second order thinking. So very simply put, there's also technically third and fourth order thinking, but I'll just put this and lump this together into the second order thinking. Immediate consequences are very trivial from my point of view. Like, okay, I scream at a colleague, probably they feel hurt or whatever, and they might do something that negatively affects you, right? Or they might just feel hurt, which is already bad in itself. But it's really important with this framework to push past the first step. So this is the first step, right? Understanding what the first follow-up would be. But think about what that could impact in the company. Could this cause some kind of gossip? Does this threaten your position long term? Whatever. And it's not about only about protecting yourself, but understanding how people could react, right? And this is very interesting because it's just probability, right? The more events you stack up behind each other, the larger the decision tree automatically gets, meaning it gets harder and harder to predict the events, and it's always because it's coupled probability, it's basically less and less likely that you guess the correct path. So with this, doing a template with good, bad, and neutral outcome for a first effect or like a first order, second order, third order, from my point of view, is very interesting. Just understand what can be the path. Like, okay, this person could be angry, this person could be happy. What that this, what could they what would they do probably if any of these cases come true, and from that point onwards, reverse engineer and do your decision. Yeah, these are the 10 frameworks that I personally find most useful. I'd love to know what you think and if you use mental framework or if you like engaging with mental frameworks. Um, these have definitely helped me a lot, and I continue to use them, and I continue also to stay educated about this and read into this and, you know, get challenged myself in the way I think about things. It's really important and it fuels my decision making. Guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope it was helpful for you today to dive a bit into the mental models and all the different mental models that I like to use. Please let me know how you like the video and what you would like to see next. Is there any topic that you're particularly interested in? I'd be super happy to do a deep dive into biases that I find very valuable in critically assessing your decision-making processes and obviously other topics. So you let me know. Thank you for watching. Be sure to subscribe and have a great day. Bye bye.